this particular moment. Okay? Whenever you're ready, Barbara.
I'm ready, go ahead.
So I'm starting with a little chanting. Você se quer me África, malufacanim fofuayo, isai mi changa loetu, gosi se quelela tina, suswa fuayo. Nossa, se querer África, malufacani fofuayo, Isai me chanda zoetu, Gossi, se querer tina, uswafuayo. So this show is a special show to me because it was inspired by someone that's really important in my life, someone who would put me to sleep as a child, and one of the first people that saw greatness in me and would laugh from any stupid thing that I would say and do to always incentivize my everything of my being. Her name is Johnny, and I've always seen her. I pray not to get too emotional, but I always do. So I also heard my second mom, and my daughter also has a Grammy, a vovó as well, vovó Johnny, and she's wonderful. By the way, she's alive. A few years ago, my mother had cancer, and they are very close. They always had a very close relationship. And through the process, their relationship got a little bit distant. And in this past few years, going home, it has hurt me because she's not as present as she used to be. So I think in some ways, this is about telling her how much she means to me. And I think that has resonate to what I needed to resonate to. So for some of you that were in my previous show, it was about a year ago, it's quite a different show. My show a year ago was dealing with COVID and all the deaths in my family, and it was the entire process very intuitive. For a lot of this work, it's not as intuitive, so it's more deliberate. I basically keep a journal next to my bed, and I do drawings and designs. So in some ways, not for all pieces, but many of the pieces, I had a vision. Sometimes the vision is not the same one that you envision, as you know, as artists, but that's pretty much what I'll talk more about the process. I want to, can you all hear me and understand?
Yes, that's a good spot. Yes.
So I want you, first of all, to acknowledge some people that are, basically I couldn't do this without you guys, right? All the artists in the gallery. Marilyn and Paul for coming a little bit earlier and helping me set up today. Barbara for doing all that she does. Yoga, Barbara, Paul for helping me hang in the show. So this is a work of a collective, of the community, and I'm just so proud of being part of this group. And they inspire me every day, and there is nowhere else that I would like to be. Just start with that. So when I was a child, this particular person had lived in Africa for many, many years. And she is an African Brazilian woman. and she's very proud of that. She's also a very strong woman, and I've always been very afraid. Part of it was because I felt things around me, and so I've always been very afraid of sleep, even when I was a child. And she would tell stories about her time in West Africa, and she would sing songs and show pictures, and those moments were really my inspiration for this show. So I've never been to Africa, but I'm from Brazil, and I'm from a culture that I love very much. And most of the main elements in Brazilian culture that I identify the most are African. One needs to understand that while historians argue that about 1 million slaves came to North America, that includes US and Canada, well, in Brazil, at least 7 million slaves came, mostly from West Africa, mainly from Nigeria. And Nigeria, well, Africa is the second largest continent. Nigeria is twice the size of California. So 7 million people is a lot of people. So you can imagine that they have influenced everything. From the food, our national dish comes from slavery, feijoada. It's what I love to make. It's a black bean stew with lots of parts of the pig that the owners of the plantations didn't want to eat, and the slaves would salt feet and tail and nose and cook with beans, and that's what usually for a special occasion when I have friends around, that's what I make. The street foods like acarajé, which is this fritter, this bean paste fritter with dried shrimp, is completely African, is completely Yorubaland. And the samba, the carnival, the way we play soccer, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So we are a reflection of all of that. And when I think about the culture in my country, those are the elements that I really think the most about. So there is that. The other connection is the spiritual connection, because they have a very unique belief system. They believe in Olorun, which is the big god, and Olorun is surrounded by a lot of other gods, deities, that sort of basically work between the living and the dead. So there is quite a bit of those deities acknowledged in my work, because it's important. In that particular realm, I mean, that has influenced the Brazilian, not just the Brazilian, because the first major migration out of West Africa came to mostly Cuba. So the Santerias in Cuba are very similar to the Candomblé in Brazil. So we also identify for us that buying to the belief of multiple gods, identify with a particular ones that we are the sons or daughters, and the African religion, the African people play reverence. Basically, they give the foods to their gods, their favorite foods of the gods. So it's a very different relationship and a different mindset than the ones we have in our culture here in terms of how we see religion. I myself and my family were spiritualists. We believed in multiple lives. There was no way for me to comprehend why I picked up paintings, 3 years ago, and the speed and the intuitive process if I had not painted before. So to me, that's the only explanation. Or I can't hear African music for once or twice and learn. So that is my belief system. I pray with my family every Sunday, same time. And we have texts that we read and we discuss and we pray. And that also has been fundamental in how to navigate, especially this past few years, that communion, that union. Now, in terms of the show itself, so I wanted to have pieces that sort of portray that are linked to those elements. I wanted to have a carnival piece, and when you look at the carnival, for example, in Nigeria, they are so similar. They don't have, of course, the financial resources that real carnival, but the street carnival is very similar. So it's a very important moment for the culture because it's almost like an escape, where for a week you just dance and you can be yourself and you don't have to be concerned about what people are going to think, and you dance and you sing and you have flowers on the hats and you have boas and you have the poor becoming rich and the homeless becoming king and the man becoming a woman, and everything is accepted those days, and it's a powerful moment for both cultures. So I wanted to have a large carnival piece, which is this one. I wanted to be very hopeful. That's why you have the rainbow colors in the background with the black and white contrasting. And I wanted to be basically flowers.
Would you mind holding it up for the camera?
This?
If you don't mind.
Oh,
Beautiful.
it's heavy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe if he moves his stand, then he won't be in the way, he won't be obstructing half the painting.
All right, so
You can see it.
I wanted to do this idea of nature and the importance of the sun and the moon, and so I wanted to have a piece. The initial drawing, it was with the moon as a guide, and I wanted to have the same woman, different colors with the 4 moon faces. So I want to acknowledge one thing. A while ago, one of my colleagues, Yoga, she said, you know, you do all the styles and you do all the different shapes. Maybe you should contemplate stacking them. So that stayed with me for a while. And I think you said a couple times, right, Yoga? And stayed with me, and she said a long time ago, you know, when I say a long time, we've been together for 3 years. So I decided to use in this piece as the full moon, one of my coasters, and I just thought it worked. And in my initial drawing, I have all the 4 different phases of the moon, and then when I did the extreme, I'll show you in a moment. So this is, my process is basically acrylic painting with lots of different pigments. This is basically ceramic, and I finish a lot of my work with resin, art resin. So anyway, this is a stencil. These days for doing the stencils, there's multiple ways of doing a lot of different silhouette chemical machines that cuts it and helps you throughout the process. So I knew I was going to use the same stencil, but they are time consuming too. So then I went for the second one recently, and I realized that I didn't want to do it anymore because I thought the 2 of them were enough. So for this one, I went even brighter. This is sand with acrylic and glitter mixed.
Hey, camera!
I had not seen you. How are you, my friend? Kimmer is my colleague from the culinary. He teaches in my department, and I'm so grateful you all here, but I had not stayed that high. So anyway, this is my interpretation. I just thought that was enough, the two of them. I love both of them for different reasons. But sometimes I was initially not completely sure. I also use gel to help fixing and giving the structure. With this one, I want a lot of texture, as I did with this. I don't know if I can do this. I'm gonna put it here for now. So I'm gonna go to the last piece, and I'm not gonna talk about all of it, but I'll be answering questions. My students, so I teach this capstone course, and my students work, it's the last class before they graduate, and they work in teams, and they do everything. So it's a charity event, and sorry Barb, I move a lot. It's a charity event, and they do everything from theme development. They do all the food, all the sculptures, all the pastries, all the beverages, marketing, finance, and all of it. So my way to honor their work is the least I can do is I always paint something or do an art or that links to their theme. So the event is on Saturday. It's called Verdun, and it's all about locality and sustainability and all of that. So they have this incredible, very large chocolate sculpture as the centerpiece of the dining room or the living room where people are arriving. And I wanted to echo that design with this particular thing. So this is Verdun. I want, especially this part, to resemble sort of chocolate, to sort of link everything together during that show. So this I just literally finished a few days ago, and I said, I brought to the classroom, I said, this is yours. I'm going to show it up. I said, I'll bring back on Monday, and you can start putting the silent auction. So, they use for decoration, and they put in the silent auction. But I also knew that I wanted to have these colors with this too. Those were some of my first pieces for this collection. They were also selected to the Black Lives Matter exhibition that just happened, is still happening in multiple locations in the area. And I had 3 pieces, and 2 of them were those pieces. So I do fluid painting mainly, and even a simple piece like this, you have 3 layers of painting. The first layer is usually house paint that I mix with blue Floetrol. And then the second layer is acrylic with pigments. And there is polyethylene, it's called sonja. It's the chemical that will help to create the cells. And I thought this cell work was really important, this particular technique for this particular exhibition, the African, because it's very reptile, it's very animal-like, and I wanted to use those throughout the entire background. And then the third layer is Australian Floetrol, and it's basically the tools that I use are very much similar to what we use for cooking. So I use funnels and knives and spatulas and cards, but it's basically a lot of it is swiping, have blow dryers, things like that. So that is very different. And I do use brushes, but not as much. For real work with the 3D stuff for here, then there was some brush work and multiple paintings. So this is not the first painting that I did inspire in my second mom. The first one I did last semester, one of my students that was the general manager for one of the charity events, when she saw that painting, she liked it very much. It was a small painting, and so she said, "I love this so much." So she had an aneurysm and passed a week before the event, and we had to deal with that, and it was very difficult for the class, for myself, for the other student general manager. So I gave that piece, latte, to them, and it was inspiring my mother, but she had like so much, and she was also, from Africa. So then I did the second piece since, which is this piece, and that is the inspiration, even though I called it Beatty, a goddess. It's inspired in my second one. So she loves more muted colors, so I wanted to honor that. Because unlike some of the work that's very colorful, this is a bit more subtle, sort of. Sometimes it's about, so I literally paint the square and the coaster together. That was inspired again in the idea of yoga, so I have a couple pieces in here that thank you, yoga. I think really works in here. It sort of brings in a je ne sais quoi. But I thought even the pieces that don't have a more realistic approach had to still screen my feelings in terms of how I see the culture. So to me, that was important. So this is to me very reptile to sort of. And the intention of this, I wanted to come up with something that I first thought that this was going to be connected to an animal. So I wanted sort of the background that reminded me, I grew up, folks, in the middle of the Amazon, and when I grew up, we had animals around. My dad had a farm. We had fish. We had onças. What's the onça that feed it? Leopards and things like that. So my first impulse was to do a background that would allow me to do a leopard animal on it. And when I went through the process, I was in a very dark place that particular evening. A lot of things had happened, and I kept painting and painting and throwing my fluid painting. Sometimes it splashes all over. And the night went by, and I just wanted to acknowledge the moment, and that was, it was the theme of mental health. We all deal with it from time to time, and we all struggle from time to time. So I wanted to, that was what this became. So it's called The Lonely Soul, which is, I feel, such many impacts. And I don't think I'll be happy to answer any question related to anything or general questions. So that's pretty much how I intended to. And I spoke too much, so I'm sorry.
No, it's great to have an artist talk that's from the heart, and I think you're very expressive, and you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you, Barbara.
I expect people do have questions.
So when you're layering in the stencil, like you carve the stencil on a material and then cut it and then you paint it? Is that how that process is done?
Yeah. So you print in local paper or transparent plastic paper,
Okay,
and then
so it has a depth to
you
it.
do a spray in the back, and then you attach, because if you don't do that, then when you do the gel and the painting can splash, so the lines compromised, and that's what allows me to do whatever thickness of the gel I
So
want
you
to.
paint it together, you don't put it on after, like put them together after?
Can you repeat?
But you paint them together, like you stick them first and then you paint them, or you paint them separate and then stick them?
So the background's completely dry.
Yeah, okay.
It's completely dry. And so I've made a lot of mistakes because I tried. In this particular show, I don't think I have any freckle painting work, but I'm working with that. And it's like, I used to do resin in everything. And then I realized that if I use art resin and I do the stencil and I resin again, so the work I would have to do multiple layers of resin to not look weird. So also, there's also one more thing. Oh, so I did use resin, and one of my pieces had crumple base. So the crumple base does not glue in resin. So then all the work basically had to come up, and there's no way to solve it. You just have to basically do another thing because it stays all those marks and things like that. So it's a lot of experimenting.
You mentioned that you started to paint about 3 years ago. What was the moment that got you started? What happened?
So I did photography for many years. In my last photography show, which was here, I started experimenting with pigments inside of the water. So it was underwater photography. I would do flower arrangement. And I started on a little cup and vase, and then I realized I had to do almost like a fish tank. And I took to a shop, and they did, but it was too reflex, so they had to redo, finally get a glass that would not. And that was the show, which, by the way, I have some books of that show still outside in the table. If anybody would like to take any of those books, you just give a contribution to the gallery, you don't have to pay anything. But that was my show, my last photography show. So I started buying all this pigments, all this ink, acrylic ink, Indian ink to do that type of work. And one thing led to the other. So I started experimenting because I also was very fascinated by macro photography. So I started experimenting with oils and soaps and things like that, just a chemical to photograph. And one thing led to the other, and then I realized I could actually paint. And then I started doing tiles. And the tiles led to the next big thing. This is my first really, the 48 by 48 is the largest piece, and it's the only that large piece that I have done. So that's really one shelf what I think.
I have a very technically focused question because I'm not in the visual arts. I love the arts, but I don't do it at all. And I was intrigued when you said that in that work, first layer, you use house paint mixed with glue. And I was wondering what effect does the glue lend to the house paint if the house paint doesn't have without the glue? I mean, I'm assuming that you don't want to stick anything to that gluey paint, that there was some kind of a textured effect.
Yes, it's a great question. And, initially I didn't use glue at all. Because the first layer is 3 layers, the chemical reaction happens between the second and the full of carrying control of the chemical. The first layer, it really does not interact that much. It serves as a basis, right, to hold the canvas for the wood. A lot of my work, this is wood, so a lot of my work is in wood. So I use glue to thicken it because a lot of it is tweaking, and I also use folks, again, cooking tools, the cake spinners. So I use a lot of that. I use, basically the tilting movement to let the paint, because it's fluid paint, so let the paint go this side, and if it is too thin, it's much harder to control. That's why the glue sort of thickens up that first layer and becomes a bit easier to control what you would expect.
And then the glue itself is the sticky quality of the glue lessened by mixing it with the paint?
Well, I'm not a scientist, but
No, I'm saying,
I tried, for
maybe
example.
you work with it more easily. I mean, then you would have more control of the paint if the glue wasn't so sticky when it's mixed with the paint.
When the glue mixes with the paint, the whole thing becomes, the paint becomes much thicker, but the glue is no longer sticky.
That's what I want.
So the ratio is something like 3/4 to the other 1/4 between the glue and the full coat. So it's mostly house paint. And also I use school glue and didn't work, so it's glue all. It's Elmer's glue all, the only one that helps retaining that control. Yeah, it's a lot of whatever. Yeah, that's my son-in-law, folks.
My name's Kenneth. Hello. I love history for one, and I really appreciate when you connect our culture with our historical culture. And I can so visibly see so much concentrated energy and emotion into all of your individual pieces of art. And I can see that, you know, they're very connected, as you mentioned, also to your childhood, which is something I find very interesting. Also, just the relationship between who we envisioned ourselves becoming as adults when we were children and who we actually became. When or how do you go about that connection with your childhood to create such inspiring work? What are the moments that you find yourself, really connecting with something that becomes such a motivating piece of work for you?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I don't know if, I think I would have to think more about how to holistically answer that, but I can share a few things.
Yeah.
To me it was important, especially that I lost some people, that there was no rescuing, to make sure that I still have time with my second mom. So I think honoring her in that way was important to me. But also I think what boils down to me, Kenneth, is that I would not have that if it was not for storytelling. And folks, I had to cross the river by canoe to get to school when I was a kid, right? That's the reality. And we don't have, my first TV didn't come in until later. And it was all about storytelling. And it can be very scary too, because some adults also have no fear of imposing fear. So a lot of the nightmare stories, things, and for someone who is already afraid, like me naturally, in my childhood, it was also difficult to deal with it. But, a lot of the things that I envision, that I feel, are related to the stories that were told and the people that told those stories, that took the time to spend time with you sharing their stories, which is their soul too, in some ways, right? It's her time in Africa, which was transformational for her. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's one of those things that, with technology especially, that I concern as a teacher. I'm concerned as a father. When my daughter comes to spend the weekends with me, we didn't have a TV until much later, and we did things together. We did art, we read, we would go to Central Park, we would tell stories, we would do music, all those things that sort of nurtures creativity and also to help us find our own voice. So I think being part of a collective culture, it plays a lot into this, right? I come from a town where everybody raises everybody, and then when you also don't fit in, there are also the ramifications that are not so positive, but overall, it's a culture of caring. And I think a lot of, with third world countries, you have to rely on the community in order to do what he do. Now, some of those strong elements from the food that he shared to the music, there is a lot in my country. There is, the carnival and the samba, it's really connected with percussion, which are all the instruments that came from Africa. Brazil is very well known for percussion, and great percussion musician, which is all African. So, I don't know if I answered, but it's all linked.
Yeah, no, I love your answer, thank you.
Also, I just wanted to add that, the creative process in the arts, they're all pretty much the same. They tap into the same kind of expression of the unconscious with the conscious and so on. And it reminds me of something the Southern writer Flannery O'Connor said when she was giving a talk at a women's college about writing. And the students wanted to know what is the story about? How do you tell what a story is about? Or they asked her about a specific story that she wanted them to read. And she said to them, if you can say what a story is about, it's a second-rate story. Because a really, really good story, like a really terrific artwork, and it's an expression of the wholeness of the person working on it. There's conscious work, there's unconscious work. You bring in your childhood without knowing it, you bring in feelings from all kinds of places. And that the only way to really explain to a person what a good story is about is to give them the story and say, here, read it. And then so that I have that same feeling when I look at your work. Because I feel a lot of it, even though you said it is prescriptive and all that, I think there's still a lot in it that work on an unconscious level. And that's what I really respond to. So really, it's impossible for anybody, whether you write or you compose or you paint, to really say, oh, this is exactly what influences particular work. Because there is that influence, but yet there's something else going on at the same time.
Yeah. No, I think we have these conversations every time one of us, and by the way, folks, this changes every month. So we have a new show every 2 months, but this particular room, we have a featured artist every month. So we always, every month, we have one of us give an artist talk, and it's sort of a common thing, right? It's how much intuitive the process is. And there's also, I think a lot of us have shared this tendency, and that's something that I'm inspired by my colleagues too, of not giving up on if it is the midday, and if it is design, and it doesn't go that way, let the piece talk to you. And sometimes the talk takes weeks, and sometimes it's months, sometimes it's 6 months, until you figure out what to do with it. But it's there. So it's like moving into a house and wanting to do the design and the changes right away, right? Which I don't necessarily feel that should be the right approach. But yeah, I mean, there is still a lot of it because it's fluid painting. It's a lot harder to control. It has to be intuitive. A lot of it is intuitive still. It just has more realism than my previous work. Yes. Marilyn.
I don't have a question. I would just like to say that I have appreciated this artist talk because you have revealed so much of yourself and what makes you work. And it's really a beautiful process, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, folks. Please enjoy some more wine. I'll be outside with some more.